I stood outside the closing room, gripping a thick envelope stamped with the county's raised blue seal. Inside was my original deed, through the frosted glass. My mother giggled like a jackpot winner. The door opened, revealing my father rapidly signing documents. I walked in, dropped the envelope onto the table, and spoke clearly. "Sorry, everyone, this house cannot be sold because it does not belong to them." The entire room froze instantly. My name is Aspen Roberts, and I am 34 years old. But to truly understand how we arrived at this freezing point, to comprehend the staggering depth of the deception and betrayal that brought me to stand in front of this mahogany table, you have to go back. The foundation of my reality began to crack. Though the warning signs had been settling into the drywall for a very long time, to understand how completely I missed the impending disaster, you have to understand what I do for a living. I am the compliance lead at Northgate Risk and Audit. My entire professional existence revolves around paranoia. I am the person corporations hire to sit in windowless conference rooms and tear apart 1,000-page vendor contracts, financial disclosures, and operational protocols. In my world, a single misplaced comma, an ambiguous indemnity clause, or a misfiled document can trigger catastrophic legal liabilities and cost a company millions of dollars. I am trained to spot the lie hiding in the fine print. I am paid exceptionally well to see the disaster long before it ever strikes. The bitter irony is that while I was busy guarding corporate fortresses, I left the front door of my own life wide open. The house was a classic, sprawling vintage bungalow nestled in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Ashford Ridge. I bought it 5 years ago entirely on my own. It was not a gift, and it certainly was not an inheritance. That house was the physical manifestation of my grinding 20s. Every original oak floorboard, every piece of intricate crown molding, and the wide, wraparound front porch was paid for with 80-hour work weeks, skipped vacations, and a relentless dedication to my career. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I felt completely secure. Then, 2 years ago, my parents lost their modest townhome. They had been drowning in a mountain of undisclosed consumer debt and high-interest loans for a decade. They showed up on my porch one rainy Sunday afternoon with a rented moving truck, a dozen mismatched cardboard boxes, and a carefully rehearsed performance of tearful desperation. It was only supposed to be for a few months. It was just a brief, temporary bridge until my father found a better job and they got back on their feet. I cleared out my guest rooms and welcomed them in. A few months quietly bled into a year, and that year seamlessly stretched into 2 years. Slowly and insidiously, the dynamic within the walls of my home shifted. I stopped being the gracious, supportive host and was systematically downgraded to a breathing, automatic teller machine. I paid the annual property taxes out of my own savings. I covered the soaring homeowners' insurance premiums. When the ancient water heater violently ruptured and flooded the basement last winter, I was the one who wrote the 4-figure check to the emergency plumber. I bought the groceries, I paid the utility bills, and I funded their comfortable lifestyle. Yet, instead of gratitude, I was routinely subjected to lectures about my profound selfishness, sitting at my own dining room table, eating a roast that I had purchased. My father would gesture aggressively with his fork and complain about my priorities. He would tell me I worked too much, that my career was making me cold, and that I simply did not know how to think about the family as a cohesive unit. Then there was my younger brother, Tanner. Tanner was the family's self-proclaimed tragic genius. He never moved in permanently, but he hovered like a persistent storm cloud. Tanner changed careers every 3 or 4 months. One season, he was a frantic day trader burning through his savings. The next, he was developing a mobile application that was absolutely guaranteed to revolutionize the local food delivery market. He firmly believed he was always one wealthy angel investor away from becoming a tech millionaire. Because of this delusion, he always needed a massive infusion of seed capital right exactly now. He treated my living room like his personal venture capital pitching stage. Whenever I calmly refused to co-sign his risky loans or drain my retirement accounts to fund his fleeting obsessions, he would dramatically sigh, pack up his laptop, and accuse me of wanting him to fail. But my mother, Marilyn, was the true mastermind of our domestic illusion. She was utterly obsessed with appearances. To her sprawling network of friends in the local garden club, my hard-earned home was not actually mine. It was the family estate. She regularly hosted lavish afternoon luncheons on my back patio, pouring expensive mimosas and gesturing expansively at the landscaping that I paid a professional crew to maintain every Tuesday. I would stand in my own kitchen, quietly washing the crystal glasses she left behind, while listening to her loudly declare to her guests how much she loved what we had done with the place. She posted endless, highly filtered photos on her social media accounts, meticulously cropping out any evidence that I actually lived there to the outside world. She was the triumphant matriarch of Ashford Ridge. I swallowed my pride and kept my mouth firmly shut. I rationalized their behavior every single day. I told myself that this was simply what a good, loyal daughter was supposed to do. Deep down, I was desperately lonely for a functional, loving family. I foolishly reasoned that if I just provided enough financial stability, if I just gave them a safe harbor to rest and recover, the panic of their bankruptcy would eventually fade. I thought we could finally be a normal family. I actively chose to ignore the glaring red flags, because acknowledging them meant admitting that the people who raised me were fundamentally broken and profoundly selfish. But then came the small, incredibly sour details that my analytical brain simply could not rationalize away. About 3 weeks ago, I started noticing strange gaps in my daily life. Important correspondence began vanishing from my locked mailbox at the end of the driveway, official bank statements, county tax notices, and even a replacement credit card I had ordered just never arrived. At first, I thought it was a postal error, but my mother was always the first one to the mailbox every afternoon. She guarded it like a sentry. When I finally confronted her about the missing documents, standing in the hallway while she aggressively polished a brass mirror, she did not even look at me. She just waved her manicured hand dismissively. She told me the wind probably blew the letters away before she could grab them. She suggested the postman was careless and delivered my private financial records to the wrong neighborhood. Her voice was too light, too airy, and completely devoid of actual concern. I am an auditor. I deal in patterns and hard evidence. The wind does not selectively blow away only highly sensitive financial documents and government correspondence, while perfectly preserving the heavy, glossy lifestyle magazines and the cheap grocery store flyers. Sitting in my home office late one Tuesday night, staring blindly at the glowing screen of my laptop, a cold, heavy knot of dread finally anchored itself in my stomach. The missing mail was not an accident. It was not a careless postal worker. It was a symptom of a much larger disease. Someone in my house was deliberately intercepting my personal information. The missing letters were not a mistake. They were a test run. They were practicing. I was sitting at my desk at Northgate Risk and Audit on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the notification popped up on my secondary monitor. It was an automated message from the county clerk's office 5 years ago, when I first signed the closing papers on my bungalow. I had registered for a free digital service designed to prevent title fraud. It was a deeply ingrained paranoid habit born directly from my profession. The subject line in my inbox read, "Property Activity Alert." I clicked the secure link, my pulse steady, casually assuming it was a routine annual tax assessment notice or a minor zoning update. The PDF loaded line by line across my screen. It was not a tax notice. It was a 4-page legal document titled Limited Power of Attorney. My full legal name was typed across the top as the principal grantor. My eyes immediately darted to the bottom of the last page, seeking the execution clause. There, resting directly on the signature line, was my name, signed in heavy black ink, but it was not my handwriting. The loops were far too perfectly rounded, the slant entirely wrong, and the pressure of the pen was unnaturally even. Someone had forged my signature. Beneath the blatant forgery sat a bold, fresh notary stamp belonging to a man named Eli Mercer. The legal certification stated that I had personally appeared before him, presented a valid state identification, and willingly executed this massive transfer of legal authority. I stared at the date printed next to the notary stamp. It was the 12th of October. A cold, sharp wave of pure adrenaline washed over my entire body, making my fingers tingle. On the 12th of October, I was locked inside a secure, windowless conference room on the 14th floor of my office building, conducting a grueling 9-hour internal audit for a major client. I had digital badge swipe logs, cafeteria lunch receipts, and a fully recorded video meeting to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I never left the corporate premises. I had an absolute, ironclad alibi. I drove home that evening in a state of hyper-focused clarity. The initial shock had rapidly burned off, leaving behind a cold, calculating rage that felt remarkably like my daily work mindset. When I walked through my front door, the house smelled warmly of roasted garlic and expensive red wine. I paused in the tiled foyer, perfectly still, listening to the sounds of my own home. From the living room, I heard my mother speaking. Her voice was hushed but vibrating with a giddy, uncontrollable excitement. She was pacing the floor with her cell phone pressed to her ear. "I promise you, Barbara," Marilyn whispered fiercely, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "Next week, everything is going to change. It is going to be completely life-changing. We are finally getting what we deserve." I stepped heavily onto the hardwood floor to announce my presence. Marilyn abruptly hung up the phone, spinning around and instantly plastering on a bright, artificial smile that did not quite reach her eyes. My brother, Tanner, was lounging horizontally on my expensive velvet sofa, lazily scrolling through luxury car listings on his tablet. He barely looked up as I took off my heavy wool coat. "Do you guys have big plans for next week?" I asked casually, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of any accusation. Tanner scoffed, tossing his tablet aside onto the coffee table. "Do not ask too many questions," he muttered, with a dismissive, arrogant wave of his hand. "It is high-level investment stuff. You would not understand the strategy anyway. You are far too stuck in your boring corporate grind to see the big picture." I smiled thinly, nodded once, and walked straight into the kitchen. The mysterious missing mail from the past 3 weeks suddenly made terrifying, perfect sense. While they were busy in the dining room eating the dinner I had paid for, I slipped quietly out to the garage and checked the large blue recycling bin. Buried deep beneath a stack of broken-down cardboard boxes were 3 white envelopes from my primary bank and the county tax assessor. I picked them up and held them under the harsh fluorescent garage light. The top edges of the envelopes had been cleanly sliced open with a razor blade, then painstakingly glued back together with a clear, cheap adhesive. They were actively reading my private mail, resealing it, and then likely hiding it entirely to control my flow of vital information. I went back inside the house to grab a glass of cold water. I opened the heavy oak drawer next to the refrigerator, where we usually kept takeout menus, spare batteries, and random household receipts. Shoved all the way to the back, hidden beneath a pile of loose coupons, was a thick manila folder labeled "Roof Renovation Estimates" in my father's blocky. Aggressive handwriting. I pulled it out just an inch. The top 2 pages were indeed standard, boring quotes for asphalt shingles, but beneath them, the edge of a drastically different document poked out. The font was standard legal size, not contractor shorthand. Printed in the top right corner, plain as day, was a single, devastating word: escrow. My breath hitched in my throat, but I did not make a single sound. I did not storm into the living room and scream at the top of my lungs. I did not wave the forged papers in their faces, demand an immediate explanation, or threaten to call the local police. Doing so would only give them the precious opportunity to destroy the physical evidence, panic, or concoct a brand new, elaborate lie. They were using my own house to fund their ridiculous illusions, gambling with my total financial ruin as collateral for their next failure. Carefully, meticulously. I slid the hidden escrow document back into its exact position beneath the fake roofing quotes. I closed the oak drawer with a soft, unremarkable click. I returned the tampered bank envelopes to the very bottom of the garage recycling bin, arranging the broken cardboard over them just exactly as I had found them. I walked back into the living room, where my mother was now humming a cheerful, upbeat tune, and my brother was back to pricing imported sports cars he could never possibly afford. I sat down in my favorite armchair, opened a thick hardcover book, and decided right then and there to play their treacherous game. I would remain absolutely, terrifyingly silent. I would let them feel completely safe, let them feel incredibly clever, and let them keep walking blindly toward the edge of the legal cliff they were currently building for me. I was going to let them reveal every single card in their hand, and then I was going to systematically burn their entire table to the ground. In behavioral psychology, there is a defensive technique known as the gray rock method. It is a strategy utilized when dealing with manipulative, toxic, or abusive individuals. The premise is incredibly simple but profoundly difficult to execute. You make yourself as utterly uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally vacant as a common gray rock. You provide zero emotional reactions. You do not argue, you do not question, and you do not defend yourself. You starve the manipulator of the drama and friction they require to operate. Starting that Wednesday morning, I became the most boring object in my own home. I completely shut down my emotional outward responses. When I walked into the kitchen to pour my morning coffee, my face was a blank, unreadable slate. I offered no unsolicited information about my day. I did not engage in debates about the local news. I simply existed in their space, taking up minimal oxygen, projecting an aura of complete, oblivious compliance. I needed them to believe I was entirely consumed by my demanding corporate job, completely blind to the massive legal earthquake they were engineering right beneath my feet. While they thought I was merely exhausted from long hours at the office, I was quietly and methodically building a fortress around my digital and physical life. Late at night, with my bedroom door locked and a thick towel shoved under the crack to block the light, I opened my personal laptop, operating in total silence. I changed the passwords to every single bank account, investment portfolio, and utility service in my name. I did not use slight variations of old passwords. I generated complex, random strings of 20 characters and stored them in an encrypted offline vault. I enabled strict two-factor authentication on every application, ensuring that no one could log in without a physical code sent directly to my personal cellular device. More importantly, I contacted the 3 major credit reporting bureaus. With a few keystrokes, I placed a hard security freeze on my social security number. If their grand scheme involved taking out a bridge loan or a second mortgage in my name using that forged power of attorney, any lender attempting to run a credit check would immediately hit a solid brick wall. The digital lockdown was only the first phase. The next evening, after supposedly working late, I brought home 2 small, innocuous-looking boxes in my briefcase. They were high-definition, motion-activated security cameras. Because I was the sole legal owner of the property, installing surveillance equipment within my own private domain was entirely within my legal rights. I mounted the first camera discreetly on the top shelf of my bedroom bookcase, hiding the lens behind a row of thick, hardback accounting textbooks. It provided a clear, unobstructed view of my bedroom door and my private filing cabinet. The second camera was much smaller. I positioned it carefully on the windowsill of the front guest bathroom, angling the lens through the glass slats of the blinds. It had a perfect, zoomed-in view of the street, the driveway, and specifically, the locked metal mailbox. If someone was going to tamper with my federal mail again, I was going to have their face captured in high-resolution digital video. My next target was the shared network printer sitting in the hallway alcove. My father claimed he used it to print out various contractor estimates for the supposed roof repairs. The following morning, while he was in the shower and my mother was out at the grocery store, I accessed the printer's internal network portal through my laptop. Most people do not realize that modern printers store a detailed history of every document that passes through their memory cache. I pulled up the print spooler log from the past 14 days. The file names staring back at me confirmed my darkest suspicions. There was not a single document labeled roofing quote or asphalt shingles. Instead, the log was a terrifying list of standard real estate transaction forms: seller property disclosure statement, warranty deed draft, lead-based paint disclosure, buyer contingency addendum. They were printing the exact paperwork required to transfer the title of a residential property. As my silent investigation deepened, their behavior shifted dramatically, turning into a bizarre, highly choreographed theatrical performance. Suddenly, my mother transformed into the picture of maternal devotion. One evening, I came downstairs to find her roasting a massive prime rib, my favorite childhood meal. She had set the dining table with the good silver and poured me a glass of expensive Cabernet. She kept touching my arm, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She told me how proud she was of my hard work and how she just wanted our family to do better, to finally have the beautiful, stress-free life we all deserved. She was attempting to soften me up, creating a false sense of security and overwhelming gratitude so that when the time came, I would be pliable. My father took a different approach, relying on his traditional, heavy-handed authority. During dinner, he stared at me across the table, his expression stern and commanding. He launched into a long, unprompted lecture about familial duty and sacrifice. He explicitly reminded me that he and my mother had given up their youth to raise me, that they had housed me and fed me for 18 years, and that children inherently owe a massive, unpayable debt to their parents. He was laying the psychological groundwork, trying to convince me that whatever financial moves they were making, I had no right to question them because I was forever in their debt. Tanner, however, was the most reckless. He lacked the patience of our parents. While we were cleaning the dishes, he leaned against the kitchen counter, casually twirling a dish towel. He was trying to gauge my awareness, dropping vague, alarming hints to test my reaction. He mentioned that the economy was extremely volatile and that sometimes families had to make aggressive, unconventional financial moves to survive. He looked at me sideways and muttered that if I ever stopped being a team player, or if I did not cooperate with the family's overall vision, we could all lose everything in an instant. It was a clumsy, thinly veiled threat disguised as brotherly advice. Through all of this, the prime rib, the guilt trips, and the veiled threats, I remained an absolute, impenetrable gray rock. I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply chewed my food, looked them dead in the eyes, and offered the exact same monotonous response to every single manipulation. I understand. I gave them nothing. I let their lies wash over me and evaporate into the air. When dinner was finally over, I excused myself. Claiming I had a severe headache from staring at spreadsheets all day, I walked up the stairs, my face completely relaxed, projecting nothing but exhaustion. I locked my bedroom door, sat down at my desk, and opened my private leather-bound notebook. I picked up my pen and stared at the blank page. The forged power of attorney was a powerful tool, but in a heavily regulated real estate transaction, especially one involving title insurance and massive sums of money, a proxy signature is heavily scrutinized. Title companies are naturally paranoid. To close a sale of this magnitude cleanly, without triggering massive fraud alerts, the escrow officers would inevitably demand something more concrete from the actual, recorded owner. They would need a direct confirmation. I pressed the tip of my pen against the paper and wrote a single, definitive sentence. If they are selling the house, they need me to sign something else. The very next morning, I took a half day of personal leave from my corporate job. Instead of heading to my office, I drove downtown to the Ashford County Recorder of Deeds. I stood at the heavy wooden counter and requested a certified physical copy of every single document recently filed against my property parcel. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, handed me a stapled packet. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway and flipped through the pages. The first glaring error jumped out immediately. On the official cover sheet for the newly recorded documents, the primary contact address for the property owner was not my current home. It was an apartment I had rented nearly 7 years ago. Someone had deliberately filed a change of address form for all official county notifications regarding my parcel. They had redirected the paper trail to a dead end, ensuring that if the county mailed a physical confirmation of the new power of attorney or a notice of sale, it would bounce into the postal void rather than landing in my driveway mailbox. I turned to the limited power of attorney itself. The copy provided by the county was much higher resolution than the digital scan I had viewed on my monitor. I stared at the signature resting on the bottom line. It was not just a clever freehand imitation. I recognized the exact, slight hesitation at the bottom loop of my first initial. It was a flawless, identical match to a signature I had provided on a lengthy medical intake form almost 4 years ago, a document I had carelessly left in a filing box in my basement. They had not practiced signing my name. They had digitally scanned that old medical form, cropped my signature, and superimposed it onto the legal proxy document before printing it out. It was a cheap, digital cut-and-paste job, but it was apparently good enough to fool an apathetic notary public. I left the county building and drove directly to my corporate headquarters. It was time to build a wall of concrete evidence. I treated my own life exactly like a high-stakes corporate audit. I pulled my secure building access logs from the Human Resources Department, highlighting the exact moments I swiped my badge at the front turnstiles and the 14th floor secure doors. I printed out the official meeting minutes from the day the forged document was supposedly notarized. I gathered the time-stamped calendar invites and a dozen emails I had sent from my desktop terminal during the precise hour I was allegedly sitting in a notary office. I had a waterproof alibi backed by corporate server data. Armed with a thick, meticulously organized binder, I walked into the sleek, modern offices of Klein and Mercer Legal during my lunch hour. I had scheduled an emergency consultation with Dahlia Klein, a senior civil litigator whose reputation in property disputes was utterly ruthless. I sat across from Dahlia in her glass-walled office. I did not waste time with emotional anecdotes or family history. I simply slid the binder across her desk. I laid out the timeline, the forged signature, the fake address change, and my corporate alibi. I told her I wanted to file an immediate affidavit of forgery and slam a hard legal block on whatever transaction was currently creeping through the escrow pipeline. Dahlia reviewed my documents with cold, practiced efficiency. She tapped her designer pen against the mahogany desk, her eyes scanning the forged proxy. When she finally looked up, her expression was entirely devoid of sympathy. It was the look of a shark recognizing blood in the water. "We can absolutely file the affidavit and freeze the title," Dahlia said, her voice sharp and steady. "But you need to look at the bigger picture here. People who orchestrate a fraudulent sale of this magnitude usually need cash immediately to keep the illusion alive while the lengthy escrow process drags on. They are not just selling your house. They might have already taken out a hard money loan against your equity." A cold chill radiated down my spine. A bridge loan. If they had used the forged proxy to secure a high-interest, short-term private loan to fund their lavish new lifestyle, that debt would be illegally anchored to my property. While sitting right there in her office, I logged into my secure credit monitoring portal on my phone. My hard freeze was actively blocking new credit lines. But I checked my recent property title inquiries. There it was, an obscure, random processing fee for $450, originating from a private lending firm, recorded just 2 days prior. They had taken the bait of their own greed. The wheels were already spinning entirely out of their control. Dahlia asked if I wanted her to send a cease and desist letter to my parents immediately. I shook my head. A warning would only give them the opportunity to destroy evidence, flee, or attempt to manipulate the narrative. I wanted them to feel entirely secure. I wanted them to keep walking blindly down the path they had chosen. I needed them to take one last decisive, legally binding step, one more signature on their own stack of consequences. Draft the dispute notices and have them ready to send. I told my attorney, "But don't release anything until I give the final go-ahead. I'm going to let them finish writing themselves into a corner." I drove home that evening. the tightness in my shoulders giving way to a calm, icy concentration. The house fell silent as soon as I unlocked the front door. Lemon polish lingered in the air, sharp and clean. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, moving like nothing had changed, even though everything had. My mother almost appeared out of the hallway. She had on her favorite silk blouse, her expression drawn and charged with a jittery kind of nerve she was forcing into something resembling upbeat small talk. In her right hand, she gripped a thick, stapled bundle of documents. Then she stepped straight into my line, planting herself between me and the refrigerator. She shoved the heavy stack of documents toward my chest. Her eyes were wide, pleading, and intensely demanding all at once. "Honey," she said, her voice breathless and artificially sweet. "The contractors just dropped off the final estimates for the roof maintenance. They need to order the materials first thing tomorrow morning or we lose our priority slot. Sign this for me. It is really urgent." I took the heavy stack of papers from my mother's trembling hand. The sheer weight of the packet was the first glaring anomaly. A standard residential roofing estimate consists of 2, maybe 3 sheets of paper detailing labor costs, raw materials, and basic warranty information. The document she had just aggressively shoved against my chest felt like a small manuscript, easily 30 pages thick, firmly secured by a massive black binder clip. I stepped back, deliberately putting physical distance between us. I leaned casually against the cool granite edge of the kitchen island and began to slowly flip through the pages. I channeled every single ounce of my professional corporate training, reading the text not for general comprehension, but actively scanning for structural anomalies, formatting inconsistencies, and legal traps. Page 1 was printed on a perfectly ordinary contractor letterhead. It detailed the process of tearing off the old asphalt shingles, replacing the rotting underlayment, and installing new protective flashing around the brick chimney. Page 2 continued the illusion with an itemized list of labor costs and a standard liability waiver for accidental property damage during construction. Then I turned to page 3. The visual shift was jarring, like walking out of a brightly lit hallway directly into a pitch-black room. The font abruptly changed from a modern, clean sans serif to a dense, traditional serif typeface heavily favored by corporate law firms and title companies. The side margins shrank dramatically from 1 full inch to barely half an inch, cramming as much text onto the page as legally possible. The line spacing tightened noticeably. Most importantly, the bold header at the top of the page no longer read roofing estimate. It read Seller Authorization and Disclosure Addendum. They had literally sandwiched a critical real estate transaction document right into the middle of a fake home improvement quote. They were desperately hoping I would just look at the first page, see the word roof, get annoyed by the sheer volume of reading material, and blindly sign the back page out of sheer exhaustion. It was a profound insult to my intelligence. I did not gasp. I did not throw the thick packet in her face. I kept my eyes focused firmly on the middle of page 3, projecting the aura of a meticulous, annoying auditor finding a minor clerical error. "The property parcel number is wrong," I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any accusation. I tapped my index finger against a long string of digits printed near the top right margin. "They missed the 7th character. The sequence is supposed to end with a 9, not a blank space." Marilyn's face tightened instantly. The mask of artificial maternal sweetness vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a raw, frantic panic. She reached out quickly, attempting to snatch the heavy packet right out of my hands. "Just sign it anyway," she snapped, her voice rising an octave into a shrill, desperate register. "Nobody actually reads those numbers. The contractor is waiting for the authorization to order the shingles. You are overthinking it. Just put your name on the back page so I can scan it over to them before 5 o'clock. I smoothly pulled the papers out of her reach, holding them calmly at my side. A legal document with an incorrect parcel identification number is invalid. If the roofing contractor files a mechanic's lien for unpaid work using the wrong parcel number, it creates a massive title defect. I am not signing an invalid legal document. Heavy, aggressive footsteps echoed from the hardwood hallway. My father, Scott, strode into the kitchen, his jaw set hard, his chest puffed out in his classic posture of intimidating patriarchal authority. He had clearly been listening from the adjacent living room, waiting in the wings to intervene if Marilyn failed to secure my signature on the first attempt. "What is the problem now?" Scott demanded, his tone thick with manufactured exhaustion and deep disappointment. He looked at me as if I were a petulant, misbehaving toddler refusing to eat my vegetables. "Your mother is trying to make sure this house does not fall apart around our ears. We are trying to manage things for the future of the entire family. Stop being so incredibly difficult and just sign the damn paper so we can move forward." "I signed clean documents," I replied, looking directly into my father's angry dark eyes without blinking. "I do not sign dirty documents. If the contractor cannot even copy a basic 9-digit parcel number correctly, I am absolutely not trusting them with a major structural repair on my primary asset." From the far corner of the kitchen, my younger brother Tanner let out a loud, highly frustrated groan. He had been sitting on a tall bar stool near the walk-in pantry, scrolling mindlessly on his cellular phone, largely ignoring the tense exchange until this exact moment. He slammed his phone face down on the granite counter with a sharp crack. "Are you kidding me right now?" Tanner blurted out. His face flushing dark red with sudden, reckless anger, he threw his hands up in the air. "If you do not sign that right now, they are going to cut the deal, and we are dead. Do you understand that? We are completely dead." The specific word hung in the quiet kitchen air, heavy and undeniable. "Deal. You do not have a deal with a local roofing contractor. You have a work order. You have a deal with a property buyer. You have a deal with a private bridge lender." Marilyn inhaled sharply, her eyes darting toward Tanner in absolute, unadulterated terror. She knew he had just accidentally handed me the loose thread that could unravel their entire criminal operation. She had to pivot the narrative, and she had to do it immediately before I could process what he just said. Within 2 seconds, her eyes welled up with large, heavy tears. Her lower lip began to tremble violently. She collapsed dramatically against the edge of the kitchen counter, burying her face in her hands, launching into a spectacular, highly rehearsed theatrical display of profound emotional devastation. "I cannot believe you are doing this to us," Marilyn sobbed, her voice heavily muffled by her fingers. "We sacrificed absolutely everything for you. I gave up the best years of my life to raise you, to make sure you had everything you ever wanted. And now, when we are just trying to keep this family afloat, when we are just trying to build a tiny bit of security for our old age, you stand there and interrogate us over a stupid typo. You are so cold. You are so unbelievably selfish." She wept loudly, her shoulders shaking, waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the overwhelming wave of ingrained childhood guilt to wash over me. She was waiting for me to frantically apologize, drop my emotional defenses, and sign the paper just to make the awful crying stop. It was a manipulative tactic that had worked flawlessly when I was a vulnerable teenager. But I was not a teenager anymore, and I knew exactly what poisonous trap was hidden on page 3. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not step forward to rub her back or comfort her. I calmly placed the thick stack of papers down on the polished granite island, right next to Tanner's discarded phone. "Tell your contractor to print the correct version," I said softly, my voice cutting cleanly and surgically through the loud sound of her fake sobbing. "When the parcel number is accurate, I will sign it tonight." I turned my back on the 3 of them and walked slowly out of the kitchen, leaving the bait resting perfectly on the table. By giving them a mundane, technical excuse for my refusal, I ensured they now fully believed that I was still completely oblivious to the impending sale. They genuinely believed that my only hesitation was a minor bureaucratic error. They believed that as long as they went back to the printer and fixed the typo, they still had me exactly where they wanted me. The countdown clock had officially started ticking, and the sheer audacity of their operation was accelerating at a terrifying pace. By giving them a mundane bureaucratic excuse about a typo, I had successfully lulled them into a profound state of false security. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought I was just an annoying, detail-oriented corporate drone who missed the forest for the trees, because they felt completely safe. They began to make massive, sloppy mistakes. Operating from the quiet sanctuary of my locked bedroom, I expanded my digital surveillance. I monitored the incoming network traffic on our shared home wireless router. That was how I intercepted the digital calendar invite my mother had received from a local real estate broker. It was an itinerary for a scheduled open house. They had set it for a Tuesday afternoon between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. They specifically chose that exact window because they knew I was scheduled to be across the state attending a mandatory corporate compliance seminar. They planned to have strangers walking through my bedroom, judging my furniture, and placing bids on my life's work while I was sitting oblivious in a hotel conference room. But the open house was only the surface level of their betrayal. The real nightmare was buried in the financial paper trail. While gathering my father's suits to drop off at the dry cleaners, I checked the interior pockets out of sheer habit. Deep inside the breast pocket of his navy blazer, my fingers brushed against a sharply folded piece of heavy paper. It was a physical receipt for a direct wire transfer. The origin account belonged to an entity called Harborstone Private Lending. The destination was my mother's personal checking account. The amount transferred was a staggering $75,000. I immediately recognized the name Harborstone. They were not a traditional, federally regulated banking institution. They were a notoriously aggressive hard money lender. They provided fast, high-interest cash to desperate investors, using property as heavy collateral. My parents had used the forged proxy document to secure a massive cash advance against the equity of my home, but as I read the fine print on the second page of the folded receipt, a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. It was the ultimate, devastating twist. The hard money loan contained an ironclad personal guarantee clause. Harborstone was ruthless, but not stupid. They required my parents to sign as personal guarantors for the advance. This meant that if the property sale failed to close, or if the title transfer was somehow legally blocked, the loan would immediately default. The massive debt, along with a punishing 25% penalty interest rate, would not attach to my house. It would attach directly to Scott and Marilyn. They were not just planning to take my money and run. They had inadvertently chained themselves to a massive, explosive financial anchor. If their plan failed, they would be utterly ruined, oblivious to the trap they had set for themselves. My mother immediately began acting like a woman who had just won the state lottery. The sudden influx of the $75,000 bridge loan triggered a manic, life-changing shopping spree. I watched silently as glossy brochures for luxury European sport utility vehicles appeared on the kitchen counter. She casually mentioned placing a $5,000 non-refundable deposit on a premium, climate-controlled storage unit across town, clearly preparing to move her belongings out of my house and into a high-end condominium. She spent her evenings loudly discussing a potential 3-week luxury cruise through the Mediterranean, acting as if she were already a millionaire. My father, however, was cracking under the immense pressure of the reality they had created. While Marilyn shopped, Scott paced. I could hear his heavy footsteps creaking against the floorboards at 2 a.m. He was irritable, snapping at the slightest noise, his eyes shadowed with severe insomnia. He knew that Harborstone Private Lending did not play games. He was receiving aggressive phone calls at all hours, stepping out onto the back patio and speaking in hushed, frantic tones. He was being pushed hard to finalize the sale because the hard money lenders wanted their massive return on investment immediately. Tanner was equally delusional, but in his own uniquely destructive way. He strutted around the house, bragging to our mother about how he was going to take his massive cut of the upcoming house sale and use it to flip a revolutionary commercial real estate project. He promised them he would triple their money in less than 6 months. Out of morbid curiosity, I ran a comprehensive background check on my brother through the county civil court database. The results were pathetic, but entirely predictable. Tanner was currently being sued by a former business partner for $85,000 in unpaid debts and breach of contract. He was not planning to invest his cut of my stolen house. He was desperately trying to secure cash to pay off a massive legal settlement before he was forced into involuntary bankruptcy. I had every piece of the puzzle. I had the forged proxy, the network printer logs, the video surveillance of the mail theft, the wire transfer receipts, and the ironclad corporate alibi. I could have called the police right then and there. I could have blown the entire scheme to pieces in the middle of our living room, but I actively chose not to. Confronting them in private would allow them to deny everything. They would gaslight me, claim the documents were a misunderstanding, or worse, they would simply flee the state with the bridge loan money, leaving me to untangle the legal mess alone. I needed this to reach the absolute point of no return. I wanted them to sit down in a formal room, surrounded by licensed professionals, and put their fraudulent signatures on official closing documents. I wanted an escrow officer, a title attorney, and a notary public to serve as my unimpeachable witnesses. During my lunch hour, I called Dahlia Klein, my civil attorney. We finalized our battle plan. Dahlia had a comprehensive affidavit of forgery fully drafted and notarized. She had an official notice of title dispute ready to be filed with the county clerk. Most importantly, she had drafted an emergency injunction to serve the escrow company, demanding a total freeze on all financial disbursements the moment I gave the signal. "Everything is locked and loaded," Dahlia told me over the phone, her voice vibrating with professional anticipation. "We are just waiting for the date." I did not have to wait long. That evening, I was sitting at my desk, quietly reviewing a corporate audit report, when my cellular phone vibrated against the wood. The screen illuminated the dark room. It was a text message from my mother. "Signing is the day after tomorrow. Come celebrate with the family." The morning after receiving the text message from my mother, I took another deliberate detour before heading to the corporate office. I drove straight to the sleek, glass-fronted building of Blue Harbor Title and Escrow. I did not storm in demanding justice. Instead, I calmly approached the front desk, presented my state identification, and requested a private, unrecorded meeting with the primary escrow officer assigned to the Redwood Shore Holdings transaction. I explicitly stated that I was the principal property owner listed on the file, but I needed to review the preliminary disclosures privately to ensure a smooth closing, completely bypassing my parents. The escrow officer was a nervous man in a wrinkled gray suit. He led me into a small, windowless conference room. When he slid the thick closing file across the table, I immediately noticed the first layer of their systemic deception. On the primary data entry sheet, the one fed into the county's automated title verification software, my legal name was misspelled. They had typed Aspen Roberts instead of Aspen. It was a brilliant, incredibly malicious typographical error. Swapping 2 letters was just enough to slip past the automated fraud detection algorithms that cross-reference names with existing legal disputes. But it was subtle enough that any human clerk quickly scanning the paperwork would subconsciously auto-correct it in their mind. I kept my expression entirely neutral and turned the page to the notary certification on the bridge loan documents. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the bold stamp belonging to Eli Mercer. I looked up at the escrow officer and let a heavy, uncomfortable silence fill the room. I watched his Adam's apple bob nervously through my own corporate compliance network. I had run a deep background check on Mr. Mercer. He was not just a careless notary public. He had 2 formal complaints filed against his license with the state board for certifying documents without the physical presence of the signatories. The escrow company absolutely knew his reputation was compromised. They had smelled the foul odor of a fraudulent transaction. But because the purchase price was exceptionally high and the title insurance premium was massively lucrative, they actively chose to look the other way. They wanted the deal to close just as badly as my parents did. I slid the file back across the table, thanked the sweating officer for his time, and walked out without raising a single alarm. I wanted them to keep pushing the boulder up the hill. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I reviewed the dossier I had compiled on the buyer. Graham Sutter. My parents genuinely believed they had found a sympathetic investor. Over dinner the previous night, My father had smugly mentioned that the buyer was a true gentleman who was going to allow them a generous 30-day grace period to pack up their belongings and transition to their new, wealthy lifestyle. They were breathtakingly naive. Graham Sutter was a notorious corporate landlord who specialized in aggressively acquiring suburban properties through shell companies to convert them into high-yield, short-term vacation rentals. He was infamous in local real estate circles for his absolute ruthlessness. The very second the county recorded a new deed, Sutter's legal team routinely dispatched local sheriff's deputies to execute immediate, forceful evictions on anyone remaining on the premises. He never granted grace periods. My parents thought Graham Sutter was their golden ticket, but he was actually the executioner who was going to throw them out onto the street the moment the ink dried. I decided to let them keep believing he was their savior. It made the trap so much more effective. At precisely 2:00 in the afternoon, my attorney, Dahlia Klein, executed the most critical maneuver of our entire strategy. She electronically filed a formal notice of dispute regarding the property title with the county clerk, and she simultaneously faxed a copy directly to the legal department of Blue Harbor Title and Escrow. The timing was a surgical strike. By submitting the dispute so late in the business day, it legally obligated the escrow company to halt any final disbursement of funds. But it completely prevented the sluggish bureaucratic system from officially notifying my parents or the buyer before the scheduled closing meeting the following morning. The trap was set, and the steel jaws were locked wide open. I spent my final evening at home acting exactly like a ghost. I ignored the chaotic sounds of my mother aggressively packing expensive porcelain into cardboard boxes. I went into my bedroom, locked the door, and assembled my evidence package. I used a heavy black leather binder inside the plastic sleeves. I placed the original property deed with the raised blue seal. I added the certified purchase documents from 5 years prior. I included the comprehensive security badge logs from my office, the time-stamped corporate emails, and a digital flash drive containing the high-definition video of my mother tampering with my federal mail. Finally, I placed the analytical breakdown of the forged limited power of attorney right on top. It was a concrete, undeniable mountain of legal destruction. I stood in front of my full-length bedroom mirror for nearly an hour, in a situation completely saturated with severe emotional betrayal. The absolute worst thing a victim can do is lose their temper. Anger allows the perpetrators to deflect and shift the blame. If I walked into that room screaming and crying, my mother would instantly play the victim, and my father would use his physical presence to intimidate me out of the building. I practiced breathing. I smoothed my posture. I rehearsed my entrance until I felt absolutely nothing. I stripped away the daughter who had been used, discarded, and financially hollowed out. I became the corporate auditor. I practiced the exact phrasing, ensuring my voice carried the heavy, undeniable weight of pure fact. There would be absolutely no arguments, no desperate pleas, and no emotional outbursts. I only needed to deliver the truth and watch their meticulously constructed fantasy collapse under its own weight. At 10 o'clock that night, my cellular phone lit up on my nightstand. The screen displayed a single, encrypted text message from Dahlia. "Tomorrow." They sign, and you walk in at the exact right minute. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive heavy cream hung thick in the dining room air. It was a Wednesday evening, just hours before their meticulously planned betrayal was scheduled to cross the finish line. My mother had transformed our ordinary dining table into a lavish banquet, laying out the fine china and lighting tall taper candles as if she were hosting a royal coronation. She had spent the entire afternoon cooking, humming cheerfully to herself, completely intoxicated by the delusion of her impending wealth. I sat quietly at the end of the table, cutting my steak with slow, deliberate precision. The atmosphere was completely surreal. They were celebrating the successful theft of my entire life's work right in front of my face, and they were doing it with my own wine glasses. My brother, Tanner, was already 3 glasses deep into a bottle of imported red wine. His face was flushed, and he was gesturing wildly with his fork. He spent 20 minutes loudly detailing the exact specifications of the imported Swiss chronograph watch he planned to purchase by the end of the week. He talked about the rose gold bezel and the sapphire crystal face with the fervent desperation of a man who firmly believed a piece of jewelry could somehow erase his massive legal debts and endless string of professional failures. Marilyn sat opposite him, her cheeks glowing from the alcohol and the sheer thrill of getting away with it. She smiled magnanimously, resting her hand lightly against her collarbone. She looked at me with a sickening display of artificial pity, the kind wealthy socialites reserve for charity cases. "You know, sweetheart," my mother purred, swirling the dark liquid in her glass. "Once everything settles down and we are comfortably situated in our new place, your father and I were talking. We want to set aside a little something for you, a small nest egg, just to say thank you for letting us crash here for so long. Maybe you can finally take a nice little vacation. You work far too hard." They were offering me pennies from my own bank account. They were trying to toss me a scrap of my own flesh and dress it up as a generous maternal blessing. I chewed my food silently, observing them with a cold, detached fascination. The way they excitedly divided the hypothetical profits felt incredibly primal. They were like a pack of starving scavengers ripping apart a fresh carcass, utterly oblivious to the fact that the prey they thought they had killed was quietly sitting right next to them, watching every single bite. They had already mentally spent hundreds of thousands of dollars that did not belong to them. They had built an entire kingdom on a foundation of forged ink and arrogant assumptions. Suddenly, the lively chatter died down. My father, Scott, placed his heavy silver fork onto his porcelain plate with a sharp clatter. The cheerful facade dropped from his face, replaced by the deep, exhausted paranoia that had been plaguing him for days. The hard money lenders were clearly still breathing down his neck. He leaned heavily onto his elbows, his dark eyes locking onto mine across the candlelight. He studied my blank expression, searching for any sign of rebellion, any hint that I might blow the whistle before the ink was dry. "You are awfully quiet tonight," Scott rumbled, his voice low and tight with a thinly veiled warning. "Aren't you happy for us? Aren't you glad this family is finally catching a break?" It was a test, a sudden, sharp interrogation born out of absolute terror. He needed me to validate their crime. He needed me to be the compliant, subservient daughter they had raised me to be. Just for 12 more hours. I met his gaze perfectly. I did not blink. I did not let a single ounce of my simmering rage leak into my posture. I offered him a soft, entirely hollow smile. "I have a very busy morning at work tomorrow," I answered simply, keeping my tone light and casually dismissive. "I have back-to-back compliance meetings, but I will stop by your appointment when I'm finished, to see everyone." The collective sigh of relief around the table was almost comical. The tension vanished instantly. My mother actually clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with triumphant delight. She truly believed she had won. She believed I had finally surrendered to their authority, accepting my role as the silent, accommodating host who would just quietly fade into the background while they absconded with my equity. Marilyn stood up, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind. It was a suffocating, deeply possessive embrace. She squeezed me tightly, pressing her cheek against my hair. "That is my good girl," she whispered, her voice thick with condescending affection. "Tomorrow is going to be a beautiful day for all of us." I politely excused myself shortly after dessert. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, my steps silent on the carpet. I locked the door behind me and turned on the small desk lamp. The house beneath me was still buzzing with laughter and the clinking of expensive crystal, a victory party for a battle they had already catastrophically lost. I walked over to my closet and pushed aside a row of winter coats to reveal the small, fireproof combination safe bolted securely to the floorboards. I spun the metal dial, the rhythmic clicks echoing softly in the quiet room. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, resting perfectly flat beneath a stack of old tax returns, was a plain white envelope. I pulled it out and traced my fingers over the heavy paper. Inside was the actual, original property deed bearing the raised, undeniable seal of the county recorder. It was the only piece of paper in the entire world that truly mattered. I placed the envelope carefully into my black leather work tote, settling it right next to the massive binder of accumulated evidence. The motion felt incredibly final, like a grandmaster deliberately sliding the queen across the board to execute an inescapable checkmate. I opened my laptop one last time. I drafted a concise, professional email directed to the primary escrow officer at Blue Harbor Title. I scheduled it to send automatically at exactly 9 o'clock the following morning, right as their meeting was scheduled to begin. The message contained only 2 sentences. I will be attending the Redwood Shore Holdings closing in person. Please keep all parties in the room for 10 minutes until I arrive. I closed the laptop screen. I walked over to the window and pushed the curtains aside. The suburban street was quiet and bathed in the pale yellow glow of the streetlights. I looked down at the wide front porch I had painted myself, the ancient oak tree I had meticulously pruned, and the solid brick walkway I had paid for with years of relentless overtime. For 2 long years, this house had felt like a hostile territory, occupied by people who viewed me merely as a stepping stone. I placed my hand against the cool window pane. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold, crisp reality of the moment settle deeply into my bones. Tomorrow, this place will have an owner, and this time, there will be only one. The digital clock on the conference room wall clicked to exactly 9 in the morning. I stood in the plushly carpeted hallway outside the primary meeting room of Blue Harbor Title and Escrow. Through the frosted glass, the scene played out exactly as I had anticipated. My parents had arrived 20 minutes early, dressed flawlessly, radiating the arrogant confidence of lottery winners holding a winning ticket. Sitting across from them, the buyer, Graham Sutter, was displaying obvious signs of impatience. He kept checking his luxury wristwatch, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the polished mahogany table. He was a man who understood that in the world of aggressive real estate acquisition, time was the enemy. He leaned forward and instructed his personal attorney to expedite the reading of the standard clauses. He wanted the documents signed, the escrow finalized, and the massive wire transfer initiated before the lunch hour. He was terrified of any last-minute complications that could derail his lucrative vacation rental project. The escrow officer, looking slightly pale after receiving my delayed email, began sliding paper after paper across the table. Scott and Marilyn did not read a single word. They were completely blinded by greed. They blindly initialed paragraphs detailing severe legal liabilities, financial disclosures, and binding arbitration agreements. They were signing their names as fast as the officer could point to the empty lines. They reached the final stack, the warranty deed. I pushed the heavy brass handle and stepped inside. My breathing was perfectly steady. My face was an absolute void. I walked straight to the table, dropped the thick envelope bearing the county seal onto the wood, and delivered the exact words I had practiced in my mirror. Sorry, everyone, this house cannot be sold because it does not belong to them. I am Aspen Roberts. I am the owner, and this is the original deed. For one suspended second, Marilyn tried to play her usual game. She let out a strained, nervous giggle, her eyes darting toward Graham. She opened her mouth, fully prepared to dismiss me as a dramatic, confused child. I did not give her the chance to speak. I unzipped my black leather tote bag and began dealing documents onto the table like a casino dealer executing a flawless hand. First, I slid over the formally notarized affidavit of forgery prepared by Dahlia Klein. Next went the thick stack of corporate security logs, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that on the exact day and hour the proxy was supposedly signed. I was securely locked behind a corporate security checkpoint over 40 miles away. Finally, I placed the high-resolution photographs extracted from my hidden camera, clearly showing Marilyn standing at my driveway mailbox with a razor blade in her hand. The temperature in the room plummeted. The escrow officer instantly pulled his hands entirely away from the table, treating the paperwork as if it had suddenly caught fire. Graham Sutter's attorney leaned over, quickly reading the top paragraph of the forgery affidavit. The lawyer's face drained of all color. Advising a client to proceed with a purchase involving a severely clouded title and active criminal fraud was an absolute violation of legal ethics. He whispered harshly into Graham's ear. Graham slammed his hands flat against the table and glared at me. I have invested significant capital and weeks of my time into this acquisition. If you ruin this deal, I will countersue you for every single penny of my lost revenue. I looked down at him, my expression completely unchanged. You are entirely welcome to file a lawsuit, Mr. Sutter, but you need to ask your legal counsel a very simple question before you do. Are you going to sue the actual property owner holding a certified original deed, or are you going to sue the two fraudulent individuals sitting across from you who just attempted to sell a house using fabricated documents? That was the exact moment they froze completely. Marilyn looked down at the irrefutable photographic evidence of her tampering with federal mail. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble so violently that the expensive silver pen slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly against the wood. She realized in a terrifying flash that her entire facade was collapsing under the crushing weight of concrete evidence. There was no argument she could make. There were no tears that could wash away the corporate access logs. Beside her, Scott seemed to shrink inside his tailored navy blazer. I watched the horrible realization wash over his face, with the property sale instantly dead in the water. The $75,000 bridge loan they had illegally secured from Harborstone Private Lending was no longer a temporary stepping stone. It was now a massive, unpayable debt, carrying a 25% penalty rate. And because he had signed a personal guarantee, the ruthless lenders would not be coming for my house. They would be coming directly for him. The escrow officer immediately declared the transaction completely canceled and officially notified all parties that his office was legally obligated to report the suspected forgery to the state regulatory board. Graham Sutter stood up, cursed loudly, and stormed out of the conference room with his attorney rushing behind him. I did not stay to watch my parents try to explain themselves. I turned around, walked out of the glass doors, and drove straight to the county clerk to officially record the title dispute and lock my property down forever. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, a professional locksmith had completely replaced every single deadbolt and window latch on my house. I spent an hour on the phone with the postmaster, establishing a secure, locked post office box for all my future correspondence. I updated my homeowner's insurance policy, explicitly removing my parents from any authorized access lists. When the sun finally began to set, casting long golden shadows across the hardwood floors, I stood right in the center of my living room. Their mismatched cardboard boxes were still piled in the corner, waiting for a moving truck that was never going to arrive. They would have to come get their things eventually, but they would do it under the strict supervision of a civil standby officer. I listened to the house. For the first time in 2 solid years, there was no passive-aggressive sighing from the kitchen. There were no hushed, frantic phone calls on the back patio. There was no one attempting to drain my bank accounts or steal my future. It was just perfectly, beautifully quiet. I never had to scream. I never had to throw a tantrum. I just placed the absolute truth down on a mahogany table, stepped back, and let the truth do the rest of the work. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. Please drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this, do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show some extra support by hitting that like button so this story can be heard by even more people.